Looking at the most influential religions and philosophies today, a curious pattern emerges. If you take any one of them and trace its documentary origins as far back as the historical record allows, the paper trail almost always leads back to roughly the same several century window in the first millennium BCE. This holds true for Confucius, the Buddha, the Old Testament prophets, and even the great ancient Greek philosophers like Socrates and Plato, considering just how much further back human civilization goes, and that these ideas all emerged independently, their chronological proximity is, well, remarkable. But what made this age so special? Did anything make it special? Or was it all just a meaningless coincidence? Hello, welcome back to Secondhand History. Today's topic is a period of time known as the Axial Age, a window between roughly 800 and 200 BCE that, depending on who you ask, is either one of the most significant points in the history of human thought, or not even worthy of a name. The best way to explain the Axial Age is to look at how academics first came upon the idea. In the early 20th century, a handful of scholars studying world religion noted how their documented roots almost always reached back to the same time period. One of them, the German philosopher Karl Jaspers, coined the term the Axial Age in his 1949 book on historical theory, envisioning it like a wheel axle around which subsequent events revolved. Specifically, he argued, this was the first time that individual, named thinkers emerged who challenged, critiqued, and overhauled the previously static moral and spiritual beliefs around them. And all modern thought, directly or indirectly, traces back to their ideas. Take Islam, for example. As the youngest of the three main Abrahamic religions, Islam directly draws upon characters and ideas from Christianity, which in turn split off from first century Judaism, which finally brings us to the Old Testament prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah. Not only would they fall squarely in Jasper's Axial Age, but according to their respective traditional chronologies, the prophet Jeremiah would have died less than 2 decades before the births of Confucius in China and Siddhartha Gautama, aka the Buddha, in India. Secular ideologies also follow this pattern. Let's take liberal democracy. The theoretical framework for liberal democracy comes from 18th century Enlightenment-era thought, which drew from changes in European thinking during the Renaissance, and so on until we reach ancient Greek political discourse, like in Plato's Republic or Aristotle's Politics. By contrast, except for a few modern neo-pagans, no one worships any deities derived from the ancient Greek gods. Let's zoom in on one Axial Age thinker, Confucius. Born in 551 BCE, Confucius lived in the latter part of the Chinese Zhou dynasty, a period of disintegrating central power and strife. Dissatisfied with this environment, Confucius taught how order and good governance could be restored through the cultivation of virtue and observation of traditional rites. The more people acted virtuously, the more others would be inspired to follow, creating a snowball effect. In Confucius's vision of an ideal society, a just ruler and his ministers could theoretically govern with such a degree of virtue and benevolence that their subjects would freely obey without any force or coercion. Just to be clear, Confucius's teachings did not necessarily match those of, say, Isaiah or Plato, but we can identify several common threads. Whether they appealed to God, reason, or social harmony, they emphasized some sort of universal moral code. There was an objective system of right and wrong, and it could be theoretically applied to anyone, anywhere. Axial Age thinkers often particularly emphasized that this code transcended wealth and status. No, not in the sense that they believed that all men were created equal, but in the sense that the elites have just as much a spiritual and moral obligation to be quote-unquote good as anyone else. When it came to government, the Axial Age thinkers were not necessarily opposed to monarchy, sometimes quite the opposite, but they shunned blind obedience in favor of a more nuanced exploration of what political system they felt would best advance the common good, not just the ruler's self-interest. In fact, ruling unjustly could jeopardize a government's grip on power in the long run. This may all sound pretty basic today, but Jaspers would say that we now take it all for granted. The pre-axial mindset, according to him, was characterized by a reliance on magic and ritual over reason to make sense of the world, uncritical acceptance of traditional power structures, and a tribalistic outlook with limited interest in universal principles or individual meaning. Sometimes the ideas of the Axial Age took a while to catch on or received active pushback. Confucius was forced from the halls of power, and Socrates was sentenced to death for quote-unquote corrupting the youth. However, with their appeal to a common morality and universalist outlook beyond any one tribe or group, the ideas continued to develop and grow until eventually future rulers embraced them to legitimize their rule, cementing them as part of a new orthodoxy. From there, conquest, missionaries, and passive soft power spread their reach around the world, all while they continue to evolve and give rise to their own intellectual offshoots. One big question remains: why? Why did people in several areas around the world all independently undergo such drastic yet parallel shifts in thinking around the same time? The truth is that the Axial Age's proponents don't know. They came up with several theories. One of Jaspers' contemporaries, Alfred Weber, proposed that the change coincided with horse-riding Indo-European nomads encountering older civilizations and blending the ideas they found with their own way of thinking. But this theory has a lot of problems. Others point to the spread of writing beyond the priesthood and palace elites. Jaspers himself proposed the importance of a mixture of small but culturally related states jostling for power, creating a shared but restless intellectual atmosphere. No one explanation puts the question to rest, but they all agree that the resulting ideas outlived the conditions that gave rise to them. The idea of the Axial Age is not without its critics. Skeptics challenge whether the age's philosophical ideas were really as revolutionary as the theory claims. In 2018, scholars writing for the American Sociological Association graded various ancient societies against a rubric of traits associated with Axial Age values, like rhetoric about spiritual equivalence between elites and common people, or the absence of so-called God Kings. They identified numerous instances of these traits popping up before the Axial Age's timeframe. Various Bronze Age Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts deal with individual moral accountability, even sometimes for the king himself. In 1045 BCE, the newly founded Zhou dynasty in China first articulated the concept of the mandate of heaven, an influential idea in subsequent Chinese history that granted the king or emperor a divine right to rule, but warned that it could be revoked if he was wicked or ineffective. Even the enigmatic Iranian prophet Zoroaster, who Jaspers included in his thesis, recently had his estimated lifetime pushed from within the Axial Age to several centuries before it, creating a bit of a problem if you're trying to claim that this was the era in which people started thinking about morality. It's also worth noting that not all of the old pre-axial creeds have died off. The biggest of these exceptions by far is Hinduism, which predates the Axial Age by centuries, yet has over 1 billion followers today. Supporters of Jaspers argue that Hinduism underwent its own axial-like overhaul when confronted with Buddhism in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, but it's harder to make the same statement about Shinto, the animistic Japanese faith that permeates Japanese culture, coexisted with Buddhism for centuries, and yet lacks any fixed beliefs or moral code. In other words, the supposed universal appeal of the Axial Age's offer of universal truth might be somewhat overstated. In light of these issues, a few critics take issue with the whole concept of the Axial Age. According to this relatively small group, talk of an Axial Age undeservedly elevates certain cultures and ideologies over others and reflects Eurocentric biases about what constitutes human development. Indeed, although Jaspers stressed that his idea of the Axial Age was not exclusive to Europe, he still spoke of certain cultures that he deemed pre-axial as intellectually lesser. But what exactly makes Confucius's Analects or Plato's Republic any more profound or insightful than a Lakota shaman's oral tradition? It's easy to forget that in many places, the religions and ideologies derived from the Axial Age spread not just through persuasion and winning hearts and minds, but through very unaxial age brute force. Despite these criticisms, the idea of the Axial Age still holds significant influence in academic and popular circles. If you ask me, perhaps what made this period special was not that it was the first time people seriously reflected on the world and their place in it, but that it was the first recorded time when historically verifiable individuals re-examined, critiqued, and systematized those reflections into self-contained, universally applicable religions and philosophies. Whether or not that was a positive or negative thing is up to you. The debate continues, but if nothing else, it's remarkable that so many of the world's major schools of thought all trace back to the same segment of human history. What, if anything, it means is an open question.
May I add something?
What?
The Axial Age is interesting, sure, but it's really more a topic for theologians, sociologists, and philosophers than professional historians.
Why does it matter? It's all history, right?
It involves history, sure, but because the topic is so broad, historians can't really use their preferred methods to explore it, leaving the matter to academics from other fields. For example, while a sociologist can get away with the ASA study's matter-of-fact quantifiable axiality scorecard, an academic historian would probably want a qualitative explanation as to how and why each part of the score was created and assigned. Remember, Jaspers was not a trained historian.
So, that doesn't mean we can't discuss it.
But we should take any such discussion with a grain of salt, just like a physicist talking about chemistry or a YouTuber talking about stuff he barely researched.
Okay, that's it.
I came prepared this time, and you're stuck with me.
Well, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and hope to see you next time.